we're hoping in the future we'll have more of these programs interpreted into Spanish. I'd also like to finally thank our co-presidents, Terry Wildrick and Arlene Herkemeyer, for their support of this program and for arranging all the publicity. We have a busy campaign season ahead of us. I just want to highlight some of them. Out on the table outside, there's a flyer that lists all of them, but on October 6th at 7 p.m. we have a CTV Southampton aired candidates for Suffolk County Legislature. On the 12th at 1 p.m., this is an in-person debate on Shelter Island. The candidates for Supervisor, Town Board, Superintendent of Highways, and Town Clerk. On the 15th, there's a virtual debate on LTV with the candidates for East Hampton Town Council. On the 20th at 7 p.m., a virtual debate on CTV for the candidates for Southampton Council. And on 10/23, 7 p.m., in-person debate at Peconic Landing in Greenport, and those are the candidates for Southold and Fisher Island. All these events will be listed on our website, so you can go just to the League of Women Voters for the Hamptons, Shelter Island, and the North Fork and find them listed. And finally, on the 19th, the League's Youth Committee will be holding its annual student program, Running and Winning for East End students. This year's topic, as luck would have it, is how to run for the school board. A timely topic, since this is the first year that any school that has a high school must have a student ad hoc or ex officio member on the board to present the student's view. Running and Winning is a very popular program and cultivates and nurtures a lot of future activists. This evening's moderator is well qualified to lead tonight's panel discussion. Andrea Gabor is not only a League board member and board member and a chair of the government committee, she's also the Bloomberg Professor of Business Journalism at Baruch College, City University of New York. She's the author of After the Education Wars and a former education columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. Please join me in welcoming Andrea as well as our panel.
Thank you, Kathy. Good evening, everybody. Thanks all for coming. I also want to give a big hearty thanks to the folks at LTV Studios and my colleagues at the League, so thank you again. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to provide a little historical and contemporary context for this evening's discussion of school boards and the role they play in our democracy. School boards emerged in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the mid-1600s, where ordinary citizens were tasked with establishing and overseeing schools. The impetus here was that public education was seen as vital to the whole process of democracy. That message was amplified many years later by President John Adams, who was himself a former school teacher, and who argued that you can't have democracy without an educated citizenry. By the early 1800s, in states like New York, legislatures established school districts and empowered citizens to elect school boards that had the authority to levy taxes for educational purposes. Today, of course, school boards select superintendents, they select textbooks, and they develop a variety of district-wide policies. Very importantly, until recently, most school board elections have been nonpartisan. They've been very local affairs. That system, of course, has been tested in recent years by growing political polarization, the nationalization of politics, and the charter movement, which advocates the appointment, not the election, of school boards in what are effectively private schools run with public funds. But the biggest challenges now are coming from Washington, where the Trump administration has promised to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education. This will likely move more funds to states in the form of block grants, which means that a lot of programs that are currently mandated by the federal government, for example, those serving vulnerable student groups, such as English language learners and rural students, will be left entirely to the discretion of states. With that bit of table setting, I'd like to introduce our panelists who will say a few words about why they are here. Then I'll ask some questions and encourage the panelists to respond to each other, not just to me, and we'll wrap up with some questions, hopefully from the audience. So I'm going in alphabetical order. I'd like to welcome Assemblyman Tommy John Schiavone, who represents the 1st Assembly District covering Southold, Shelter Island, East Hampton, Southampton, and part of Brookhaven. He probably doesn't need much introduction to this crowd. Elected in 2024, he is a lifelong Sag Harbor resident and retired school teacher. He taught social studies in the Center Moriches School District for 30 years and served on the Sag Harbor School Board of Education from 2014 to 2017. And by the way, there are extended bios outside if you want to read more about our panelists. Jermaine Smith is a Southampton School Board trustee. He also served as a tribal councilman for the Shinnecock Nation from 2019 until last April. As an enrolled member of the nation, Mr. Smith is deeply committed to advancing education, youth development, and cultural preservation within his community. Kate Rossi Snook, at the end, was first elected to the Shelter Island School Board of Education in 2019 and served for 6 academic years, 4 of which were in the role as vice president. As a working mother, she wanted to be an active participant in the Shelter Island community and a parent who contributed to the school in the most productive way possible. Ms. Snook is an aquaculture specialist and stewardship site manager for Cornell Cooperative Extension and its Back to the Bays Education Initiative. Bob Vecchio, to my right, immediate right, is the executive director of the Nassau Suffolk School Boards Association, which serves 116 boards of education on Long Island and represents 96% of its public school students. He served 18 years on the William Floyd School District Board of Education, most of those years as the Board of Education president. Prior to his current position, Mr. Vecchio worked for over 30 years in healthcare accounting for a drug and alcohol rehab center based in West Hampton Beach. Mr. Vecchio also hosts and produces a weekly radio show highlighting schools across Long Island on LI News Radio called Spotlight on Long Island Schools. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you all for some opening remarks. Assemblyman, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you, everyone, and thank you all for being here. And I want to thank the League of Women Voters for yet another wonderful community-centered and community-sponsored event this evening. And thank you to LTV for providing this location. It really is, it's fantastic to be here. As you said, I'm a retired school teacher. I spent 30 years as a public school teacher. I went to public schools. Our children went to public schools. So public education is important to me, not only as a citizen, but as a legislator in New York State. I truly believe it is one of the best things that we do here in New York is educate kids. And I'm proud to be on this board and to have this conversation. I just kind of want to give a shout out to the president of the East Hampton Board of Education, who is in the audience tonight. J.P. Foster is here with us, and he is running for Southampton Town Board. But also we're joined by Glorian Burke, who is on our planning board, and Steve Coates, who is on the Bridgehampton Library Board. So thank you all for being here.
Jermaine, do you want to go next?
Sure.
And we're going to shift to first names. I had forgotten.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Andrea, thank you, and the League of Women Voters, thank you for having me. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Jermaine Smith from the Shinnecock Nation. We do have a couple of board members, our ex officiato, our student in the audience. Yeah. Kaya. And Monique Proctor's in the audience as well from Southampton. I think it's great, this forum. It's an important job. It's an important position to be a member of a school board. And I hope we have a wonderful evening tonight.
Kate, do you want to go next?
Sure. As a fellow Shelter Islander, when Ms. Kathy Kenny asked me to participate in this panel, I was quite flattered. But thinking about it, I think the real goal, personal goal, for participating this evening is that all of you in the audience and those watching might walk away from this feeling educated on what it means to be a board member and inspired to potentially run or honestly at least show up to the meetings. Participation is everything, and you don't have to just be a parent. You're a taxpayer, so you absolutely have something to contribute in the decisions that are made in the schools.
Bob?
I want to also thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this panel discussion tonight. I want to thank my panelists. I look forward to the conversation and the audience members as well. School board service, I think, is critical to democracy, as this forum has indicated. And, I have found in my 18 years of serving on a board, 15 as board president, and now as executive director of an organization that represents school boards across the entire region, school board members are truly servant leaders. And I believe the model of what good governance should be, is, and deserves to be for our kids. And, if the rest of government was run the way school board members serve, because they're unpaid elected volunteers who care about their communities, that's true definition of servant leadership. And I'm proud to advocate alongside of them, for them, and I was proud to serve for 18 years through some difficult times, great times, and I say often it was the most frustrating, annoying, rewarding, best experience I ever had in my life. And to quote a good friend of mine, oftentimes we'll hear from folks, school board service is a thankless job. It's not, it's priceless. I got to hand my children their diploma. I got to see the triumphs and victories of kids who changed their life trajectory through the power of public education. I cried with parents who lost students way too young. Toughest thing I ever did as a board president was attend student funerals. You get the highs and the lows, you see the successes, and you play a role in defining how to address the shortcomings and closing gaps. It's a great experience, but you got to be committed to it, and you got to be committed to it for the right reasons.
Thank you for that. And you've actually led right into my first question, which is, this is an uncompensated volunteer job, and you all, when you ran for school board, were all busy people. So can you just say a few words about why each of you chose to do this? Kate, let's just go down the row here. Kate, do you mind starting?
Well, mentioned a little bit in my bio, I was a mom. I didn't feel that joining the PTSA was in my wheelhouse. So I was honestly convinced to run for the board, as most people are. I feel like a lot of people have to be convinced. But I'm so grateful that I did. And while we were immediately faced with quite a lot of hard choices, hard topics to make decisions on as a school board, I'm grateful I was there to help guide the school. And my background in environmental science, for example, one of my highlights was helping guide the school through the septic upgrade to improve water quality on the island, which we are a single aquifer island, so water quality is incredibly important, and it's our duty to do whatever we can to offer people clean drinking water. So I don't know if that really answers your question.
Thanks. I suspect everyone's going to have a slightly different answer to this. So, and I loved your example about what you could bring to this as a scientist, and everyone has something they can bring to a school board. So, Tommy John, you next.
I got on the school board because I was asked.
Okay.
There was an opening on the school board, and I was honored to be
But it's-
asked,
but
and
then-
I was
okay,
happy
hold on.
and proud to do
We
it. I
need the
was kind of
interpretation.
honored that
Yes,
I
sir.
was asked to fill a vacancy, actually to interview
Take this one
to
out.
fill a vacancy on the school board. And
Now
I
start.
believe in it. Like I said earlier, it's incredibly important to do. So I love my community. I'm from Sag Harbor. My kids went through that school system as I did, my father, my grandfather. And so, it was just a way for me to give back. And I also believe that it's important that educators serve on the school board. As a 30-year social studies teacher, government teacher, I wanted to give back in that way. And, bringing my knowledge of education as a teacher. And I also was active in collective bargaining negotiations with the teachers union. So I've sat at the table, so I brought that experience to the school board.
Germaine?
Yes, so I was asked as well. Southampton School District has my cousin Sean Smith to blame for that. I got on in 2022. I got on tribal council in 2029. 2029. No, I'm not gonna. I got on tribal council in 2019, Shinnecock Tribal Council, and I was working for the school district, Southampton School District, and there were some children from Shinnecock struggling at the time in the district, and I saw a need to get more involved. So I joined tribal council. I got heavily involved with education. I still sit on ACF, Administration for Children and Families, a National Tribal Advisory Committee, where I'm a tribal primary delegate for about 32 tribes on the East Coast. And in 2022, we felt that we needed some representation for Shinnecock on the school board. My children were not in the district. They were attending Tuckahoe. My oldest daughter will be at Southampton next year in September. But I saw a huge disparity in reading and math proficiency in the Shinnecock population. And so I was asked, as I stated, I was on several different boards prior to that, and my cousin said, hey, we don't have anyone else to run. So can you do it? And I said, okay. So, I am honored to be on the school board, and sitting at this table shows the importance of being on school boards and making that effort as community members.
I wasn't asked. I actually ran against an incumbent, four-term incumbent, and I remember attending my first school board meeting based on an article I saw in Newsday that my district wasn't on the list for receiving E-rate funding. And I went to my school board meeting to say, how come we didn't get any E-rate funds and all the other school districts did? And they had a really good answer for it. And then I just started attending meetings on a regular basis. And I attended meetings for about 4 years. And I would always ask questions because I have the belief, don't assume, try to find out information firsthand, and then have an informed opinion. So I attended meetings religiously for 4 years. They even dedicated a seat in the back of the room for me. And then I ran. And one of the incumbents who was up for election that year, I happened to like the gentleman. The day I picked up my petitions, I called him and I said, just so you know, it's not personal. I just think it's my time and I'm going to run. I didn't even disparage him. It was just about change. And he said to me he was glad that his seat went to me on the night that I won. And then I ran unopposed and stayed on the board for 18 years after that. So it was an issue that I saw in a paper that prompted me to ask a question that made me go to board meetings for 4 years religiously because I had no life. And then I really said I had no life and decided to run for school board in addition to working full-time.
For those who don't know, what is E-rate funding?
So E-rate funding is a grant fund that's actually in jeopardy right now that comes out of Washington, D.C. that helps school districts make investments in technology improvements, Wi-Fi, routers, networks, things like that. And ironically enough, here we are, 20 plus years later, and that funding is at risk for a lot of schools. And for some schools, it's a sizable amount. And any money that comes out of the federal government or the state government means we don't have to go to the local resources or local taxpayers to raise those funds to make those necessary investments.
Well, speaking of funding perhaps going away, given the changes coming from the federal government, especially the prospective elimination of the U.S. Department of Education, and then a lot of cuts that we've already begun to see. How will this impact your districts and the challenges that school boards face? And especially, how is it, or is it already impacting the provision of services to the most vulnerable children in the district?
So I'll start off with that from a regional perspective. There's been no impact yet. And it's important to keep in mind the Department of Education came about in 1979. The Individual with Disabilities in Education Act and the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act were enacted in the 60s. So there's been federal mandates regarding education before there was a Department of Education. I'm certainly not advocating for the abolishment of the Department of Education. I think it's a necessary agency, but it's important to keep in mind that schools had to follow federal mandates before there was a formal agency. So the moral of that story is if the agency goes away, the mandates will not go away. There's still going to be Individual Disabilities with Education Act mandates, IDEA as it's referred to. Those are still going to be in place. They're still going to be underfunded because we don't receive enough funds from the federal government based on the government's own law as to how much school districts are supposed to receive. And then the Elementary Secondary Education Act has changed and it's still in place. And those mandates are still going to be in place. And one of the biggest mandates that come with that is mandatory grades 3 through 8 testing. So this way you can compare how school systems are doing across the country. So those mandates are not going to go away. Whether the DOE is still in place to lend support, technical support, guidance, and resources, that's the question. So we haven't been impacted yet. There's been no cuts yet. There was a threat of
recording in
over
progress
the summer, which was eventually released. The proposal for the federal budget with regards to education out of the House that was just released a couple of weeks ago has a $5 billion cut with regards to education. And that includes Title I, Title II, Title IV, IDEA cuts. So if the House proposal goes through and is adopted, that's going to present a real problem to every school district, whether you're a poor district, more affluent district, because every district has special education students. More and more districts on Long Island are dealing with poverty at a higher rate than ever before. We have a lot of title schools. An interesting statistic is that of the 408,000 students that we have in Nassau and Suffolk counties attending public schools, 49% of them are from districts that are high needs districts, meaning high rates of poverty. So almost half the kids that attend public schools are attending schools that are receiving federal dollars for high needs communities and high needs districts. So if there are cuts to title funding, it's going to impact the students that rely on those and the school systems that rely on the funds the most. This year, more than any other year, federal dollars are going to impact the state budget. And I'm sure the assemblyman will talk about this, but we're also paying attention to the other cuts, not necessarily education cuts, because New York State just lost $750 million in federal aid, and there's more to come. The second biggest bill in New York State is education, right next to healthcare. So logic is going to tell you that if New York State starts to lose a lot of federal dollars, whether it's education or not, it's going to impact educational aid. And the mandates will not go away, and the cost will still be there, and it'll literally shift the cost in a limited way from the federal government and the state government to the local level. And if you can't raise the money locally, then you're going to see cuts to programs. I was on the board during the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. My home district lost $20 million. We laid off 150 teachers. We cut programs. We slashed clubs. We even debated going from full-day kindergarten to half-day kindergarten. There was even a conversation about not having kindergarten because it's technically not mandated. It was a terrible time, and I fear we're heading down and we're getting close to that point that we may see a gap elimination adjustment period. That's what was officially named by the state, a version 2 of that. And some school systems, it took them, the neediest school systems, it took literally 15 years to rebound from that. So that's why it's important.
That's pretty grim. And the Fed funding is about 10% of total funding, right?
Yeah, depending on the district. Some districts it's like 2 or 3%, but I think on average for the region, it's somewhere between 7 and 10%.
Yeah, thank you. Tommy John, I saw you taking notes.
Well, sure. You know, the state provides about $37 billion to education across the state, and we did fully fund foundation aid, and that's something that the state has been working towards in the past couple of years. We are very concerned about what's happening on the federal government and the impact, especially the Title I cuts or potential cuts. We really don't know what they are, you know, right now. So it's hard for us to, you know, say what that's going to be. And my fear is that it's going to impact the district and the students who are most in need. You know, the most fragile among us, you know, are covered under Title I. But you know, we have gone through bad times before, or you know, stiff times before financially, and you know, we will certainly rise to the occasion, I believe. But there's going to be you know, less, I believe less funds. You know, we do, this past year we increased state aid by 2%, and we did that kind of on purpose. We, you know, we had the money, and you know, so we made those increases, and we had an idea, you know, that there are going to be changes coming. I'm told quite often that wouldn't it be great if the states had the money that was going to the federal government? Well, you know, that is yet to be seen, and I certainly will be asking those questions when the time comes. So I'm concerned, and I am concerned about the kids who, you know, need these protections the most.
I was just going to
Sure,
add,
Erica.
you
Yeah.
touched on insurance briefly, and I'd say that coming from Shelter Island, you know, we have such a small budget, but a significant portion of that is to cover insurance, and there's just, that's immovable. You can't play with that number. It just is what it is, and it led to a lot of issues this past budget season. You know, it failed the first time, and then it did lead to program cuts. It led to us having to cut the pre-K3 program, which we had fought so hard to start. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah, and one point about shifting from block grants, from formulatic grants under title funding to block grants, that goes to Albany, and then Albany will decide how it's disseminated. We're advocating to stick with the formula, because the formula gets to the districts based on enrollments and based on need. Our fear with a block grant is it loses focus on the priority. For Long Island, we've long advocated, we have 17% of the students statewide, we get 13% of the aid, and it comes down to shares. It's always worked out that way, that, you know, Long Island is a region, we send more to Albany than we get back. New York sends more to DC than they get back. So block grants, our fear is, do we get lost in the sauce, lost in the conversation, because there's a perception of tremendous wealth on Long Island, and it's really not the reality. Again, I cited 49% of the students coming from high needs communities. We're fearful that if it goes to a block grant system, it may not come down south the way it currently comes, and that will impact schools on another basis. And to build on your point about certain fixed costs have exceeded the potential to raise revenue locally or get it from the state, we were grateful that the state fully funded foundation aid, which was put in place based on a lawsuit that was, you know, 20-something years ago. And we were grateful for the guaranteed minimum increase of 2% for districts that are off formula. The problem that schools have been having over the last several years, the amount of the increases, if you're off formula, have been steady at 2%, but inflation has exceeded that, creating a gap of almost 11% over the last 3 years.
Can you just briefly explain foundation aid again for people who don't know what that is?
So foundation aid is the main source of funding that New York State sends to school districts. Foundation aid was put in place after a lawsuit by the city of New York called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. They said the state was not living up to its constitutional obligation of providing a free, sound, basic education. And the courts put a price tag to that. And the price tag and the formula was created in 2006, 2007, and it took from 2006 to 2007 to full funding last year, which we're extremely grateful of. And some school districts received a lot of money that they had been waiting for a long time. and the school districts that are not on formula because of enrollment drops have been held harmless, and that was written into the settlement with the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. So that guaranteed minimum increase is critically important because nearly half of the school districts on Long Island are off formula for one reason or the other. So if there were cuts and no guaranteed minimum increases or no guaranteed to hold harmless, more than half the school districts on Long Island would receive cuts to their education aid. And whether you're receiving 20% from the state or you're receiving as high as 50% in state aid from the state, any changes to state aid impacts local property taxes. And I'll use this as one last example, and I don't want to dominate, but William Floyd in particular received a tremendous amount of state aid over the last couple of years because it was due it based on this formula being fully funded. What they did 2 years in a row, they actually lowered the tax levy because the state was finally paying the district what it was due, and they didn't have to rely on local resources. So there is an example of how you provide true property tax relief on Long Island by giving the districts the money that they're owed, and those residents saw their tax levy reduced by double digits over 2 years. So it's a very complicated process. The last statistic I'll throw out to you, and I know I'm big with statistics, but statewide, school property taxes on average statewide is about 50%. For Long Island, school property taxes are 70%. Again, it illustrates how we pay more of the share locally for public education than the state pays the share.
I'd like to add some thoughts to that. Out here on the eastern end of Long Island, you know, Bob, you mentioned that on Long Island there's a perception that everybody here is millionaires, especially on the east end. Congratulations, everyone. But, you know, we know that, you know, the communities that we have and the folks that we have who are living and working and, you know, spending their lives here. The foundation aid and the state aid on eastern Long Island is about $120 million. That is from the Riverhead Central School District and East Moriches East. So it's significant. It really is a smaller percentage of the various budgets, but it's $120 million. So it is significant for us, and it's something that, you know, as a legislator, you know, I will always fight for that, you know, funding to come out here, and particularly on Long Island. Education, our budget as a whole, Riverhead, East Moriches East, is about $1 billion. You know, this is a significant commitment that we make out here on the East End. And just to bring it back to school boards, it's the members of the school boards who are directing the funds and the building and the, you know, overseeing the curriculum and hiring the superintendent. So it is an incredibly important position, particularly locally in the communities, and they direct large sums of money, and you know, they're carrying our water and educating our children. But I just wanted to throw some of those numbers out for the East End and how significant it is, the state funding.
Yeah, and the Springs School District is considered a high-needs school district, and folks wouldn't think a school district in East Hampton would be considered high needs, but based on the demographics, it is. And then we have rural school districts, which is a whole different ballgame as opposed to, you know, non-rural districts when it comes to state support as well.
Great. Thanks for that. One thing I wanted to get to sooner rather than later is that several of the local school districts are now minority majority. Looking just at Latinos, over half of Southampton students are Latino, if I'm not mistaken, just over, and a majority of East Hampton students are Latino. Yet there are virtually no Latino school board members on the East End. I think maybe there's one I heard there might be. So what is needed to encourage Latino community members to run for school board? And might some of the problem be that these are uncompensated positions, and do school boards need to start compensating their members if they want to get a more diverse group of school board members? Yeah, Charmaine.
So I'm glad you touched on that, because I was going to bring that up. These two gentlemen were talking statistics. Yeah. Southampton is a very unique district. We have a robust budget. We don't receive a lot of state funding. I think it's 3 or 4% state funding, where some districts are, and Bob can speak more to this, but, you know, 60%, you know, state funded. So with that being said, we may look like a wealthy school district, but we have 7 to 9% of the students are Shinnecock students. As you stated, there are, I think it's about 47, 48% Latino students. So while we have a wealthy district, and there's members of the white community too that are underserved and misrepresented. So when that money comes in, the importance, as Tommy John touched on, of the school board, seeing where that funding is used and utilized is extremely important, because although you're a wealthy district, and let's take Southampton out of the equation, that funding may not be going necessarily to where it needs to go to bring all students up to the level of education that they deserve and need. Now, when I got on the school board, yes, I noticed the disparity in absenteeism amongst our Shinnecock children, reading proficiency, math proficiency, but when I got more into the numbers, as I stated, it was, now I'm on this board to help multiple demographics and multiple students. And it's not necessarily just the Shinnecock students. And as far as the federal government and what's happening right now, speaking for Shinnecock, we were affected right away because you have BIE funding, Bureau of Indian Education, and we had problems getting that funding after the administration took over and they started the Doge or whatever you call it. So a lot of that was put on hold. So it did directly, impact us. And we have educators, in Shinnecock that rely on that funding, and our students from Shinnecock rely on that funding. So I see it as a very scary time and situation for federal and state funding. We have programs that originally started federally, My Brother's Keeper, which New York State has a indigenous arm to that, and we have that in the district. And so, that funding is also, you don't know if it's going to be there next year.
But in terms of representation, how important is it to have, more folks who represent those different communities?
Can I just, so when I ran for school board in 2022, I put all my flyers out in English and Spanish. I recognize, as I said, the disproportionality of the board itself and the underrepresentation of just the Latino community. And I don't know whether it is, when you live on the East End, if you're not a millionaire, you're working 2 or 3 jobs. So that is one of the, that's a good point that you touched on, you may attract more of the Latino population with some sort of a stipend, because a lot of work goes into it. There's a lot of work that, we have committee meetings. It's not just the Tuesday or Monday night, whatever your board meeting happens to be. It's the weekly committee meetings. It's the emails. It's the, executive sessions that happen before and after some of the school board meetings. So it takes a lot of time and commitment to do it, and that could be one way to attract a larger population diversity on the board system.
Oh, I was just going to say, yes, it is a huge time commitment, but I also think that communicating better that literally everyone has something to contribute, right? So I think it was, I'm trying to think, I remember our meetings were being held outside, so I want to say it would be at the end of the 2020 school year, and we had to appoint a board member. We reached out, we acknowledged that we needed better representation and diversity on our board. We reached out to Karina Montalvo, and I remember her reaction was, me, like, what would I bring? Literally everyone can bring something to the table. And I think that's really important for everyone to realize.
So what I'll add is, I don't think board members should be compensated. Because again, it's the epitome of servant leadership. Board members haven't been compensated since the 1850s when it was first established. Anytime a resolution comes up, and we just had a dinner last night with our association, there's always proposals to say, okay, maybe give school board members a tax exemption like we do for first responders as an incentive to try to get them to serve. But then it becomes self-serving, right? Because when I sit at the table as a board member, and I'll never forget this, I was presenting a budget to a civic group, and a gentleman stood up and said, well, you know, my taxes are going up, and he was spirited, I would say. He goes, and how much is your salary going up to me? And I like, well, we voted in a 50% increase for my salary, not knowing that my salary was 0, so 50% of 0 is still 0. A lot of people don't know that school board members are not compensated, and I always found it easier to stand in front of my neighbors to say, here's our proposal, taxes are going to go up X to support this proposal, and I'm not benefiting in any way, shape, or form. It made it easier to sell the budget to my neighbors, to the residents, to the business owners that were paying the property taxes for it. So our association has advocated against any compensation, whether it be a stipend, health insurance coverage, or property tax exemption, because again, it's a slippery slope. How do you attract board members? Well, I think good governance systems will attract people who want to be part of a good team, right? And how do you attract representatives who represent the demographics of the community is a tougher question. I think in today's time and day and age, it might be very difficult to establish the trust with certain communities to say, come on out and represent and bring that voice. But I thought the state was really smart with mandating, and I hate mandates, I really do, but I thought they were really smart with mandating student representation on the board. Because when we talk about a voice at the table, they are our customer. So to have them at the table dialoguing with policy debate, dialoguing with input for the budget, that's a critical voice. Whether the people seated at the table represent the demographics, to have the students now at the table, I think is going to alleviate some of that, maybe recruit some members who otherwise wouldn't want to run. You know, because I used to joke, you know, you get sworn in and then you get sworn at shortly thereafter. But again, it was the best thing I ever did, because you learn so much, you get a front row seat to how great public education is. We're really spoiled here on Long Island because our systems, for the vast majority of our systems, are really, really good compared to the rest of the state, compared to the rest of the country. We just had an article in Newsday recently about the blue ribbon schools being done away with, and there were 4 schools that were recognized here on Long Island. We send more kids to the Siemens semifinalist competitions than some states do. So, and I think that's a good sign of good, stable leadership. When other parts of the country were seeing the national political divide play out in school board races, we didn't really see that here on Long Island, thank God, and it never really took hold. And what I think our governance teams, and I'm really proud of our school board members, is we know how to disagree with dignity.
Big mascot debates, right?
So the mascot issues, yeah, is a big issue. Obviously, you know, there's a district in Nassau County that is suing and pushing back against that. And again, you know, the courts are going to decide on that, but the vast majority of the school systems went along with the guidance and the directive from the state education department. And I know Jermaine could probably speak better to that from their perspective, but, you know, we have really good governance systems here on Long Island, and we don't see a lack of people willing to run when seats open up, and sometimes you see contested elections. We've had a high turnover over the last couple of elections. I think people got burnt out after COVID, but we have really good governance systems, and that attracts good people who want to serve.
Just picking up briefly on what you were saying about students now being able to participate. If I'm correct, I think in New York, they're not allowed to vote, though, on school boards. And there are some states where or some localities where they are allowed to vote. And, you know, California's been a little bit ahead of the curve here. And I had the privilege of actually speaking to some student board members in Oakland, and they were telling me all the different ways in which, as students, they were able to bring issues to the attention of the board that the board had no idea about.
Right.
So it's going to be a big deal, I think, in the league's running and winning event in November. So.
Yeah, and I think it's good that they sit at the table as ex officio members, so this way if somebody has a problem with the budget and the tax levy that was adopted and voted on, I'll take the heat instead of the 17-year-old sitting at the table, so.
All right. So, yeah,
oh, I'm sorry.
please, go ahead.
I just want to, Bob knows more about school boards than I'll ever know. But I just want to push back on one thing, you know, with the stipend. Being a tribal council member for 6 years, when I got on, there was no pay, and then there was a small salary attached after I got on. And you're right. It's, you know, well, you're working for us now, and we have to, you know, there is that part of it, but there is always going to be something to complain about, whether it's that stipend or something else. I had a cousin that said to me, "Why are you running for the school board? Your kids don't go to Southampton." And I said, "Is that the only reason to run for a school board?" And then they said, "Oh, but your wife works in the district." And I said, "So I need a personal reason to run for."
Right.
So many people who run for school boards do have children in the district. So it is easy to point and say, well, you do that so that your kids have an easier time getting through the school. So that's just as much of a,
Benefit?
well, a reason to attack a school board member,
Yeah.
having a student that is in the district that is your own, even though most school board members get on when they have children in the district. And to touch on the other thing with the politics, when I ran in 2022, it was right during COVID, after COVID, however you want to, and I was contacted by a political party, and they said, "We would like to support you during this election," because I was running against a gentleman. It was an open seat, and there was another gentleman in the town running. And they said, "We would like to support you during this." And I said, "Well, I have friends that I grew up with in Southampton that voted for Obama, and they voted for Trump, and I don't want to, you know, push aside either side, and so I'm going to respectfully decline. If I was running for assemblyman, you know, that might have to pick a, you know, but I declined that offer, and they said, "Well, you know, the other gentleman is being supported by the other party." And I thought, as you said, I said, I'm doing this for the education of the children, not a political race. And so I was shocked that, you know, at that point, they made it very, very bipartisan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I tell people who want to run and newly elected school board members,
Partisan.
if you didn't start out running for kids, if that wasn't your first thought and that wasn't your last thought, you're in the wrong business.
Yeah,
It's not R, D, it's K.
yeah.
I'd like to add just
Yeah,
a
please.
comment to what you were saying about the school board members. I think we do need to do a better job. I know I said I was asked and then appointed, but then I had to run, and you know, you're running, and it was daunting. And I think that is something that could be a bit selective or a self-selecting process, but it is our process. But it does speak to, I think, a greater need in our society, or at least on the east end of Long Island, the spirit of volunteerism. We are in need of volunteers. It's not the same as it once was. You know, having one job raising 4 kids, you know, on one salary is just a thing of the past. And I know that our ambulance corps and our fire departments are also, you know, we see permanent signs to ask people to volunteer their time on those committees, those corps and departments. So serving on a school board after you have to run, and then when you win, you have to take 6 hours, and then it's going to be a boatload of time. You know, it's just, you know, I really, it's a lot, and it's good work, and it's appropriate work. So I think it's, you know, like those things can kind of keep people away, all people, not just, you know.
Yes, school board members are the only elected officials that are mandated to training, by the way. Elected officials all take training, but school board members in New York State are the only elected officials mandated and required by law to take training. And we're the only elected officials that run alongside of our budget. You don't vote on a village budget as a public, or a town budget, or a county, or a state. So I'm running for re-election, and here's the budget. I mean, that's a tough ask. You really have to have some real good thick skin to be in this business, but it's worthwhile.
Okay.
Municipal governments and fiscal, 2 3-hour classes. I think it's a great idea, and I'd like, all local
Yeah, which is
governments to do it.
terrific, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So smaller districts, and all of you are part of relatively smaller districts, have special challenges, especially when enrollment fluctuates, as it did pretty dramatically during COVID and after. What are the enrollment challenges districts are dealing with now? Kate, you touched on this a little bit. And I'm guessing some of those have to do with immigration crackdowns, maybe. So if you could also address that.
Specifically for Shelter Island, actually during COVID, we had an incredible boost in our population. We were one of the few schools that were open full-time in person. Because we have so few kids, we were able to be creative and absorb, I think it was 70 or 80 new students during COVID. The hot news was that we had 2 first grades at the time. Anyway, so that was actually really wonderful. The kids loved it, loved meeting new friends. Today, it did kind of drop down back to what it was. And I think the biggest challenge with enrollment is, and also it's tied to the budget, is the state obligation to bus kids to other schools if they choose not to attend the district school. So for an island in particular, you're then paying for a bus to come over to the island, pick the kids up, and then go back on the ferry, bring them to the school, then at the end of the day, come back, and then go back over. So that's 4 ferry trips, just on one ferry, a day. And then there's the north side. So that was another budgetary constraint we were dealing with. And it's unfortunate that, there's for some reason, the stigma of a small school not supplying a top-notch education, when in fact you actually have so many resources and one-on-one interactions with students and teachers that it's quite enriching. And I don't know how to fight that stigma and encourage people to really attend the district school.
Public schools.
Public schools, man.
Tommy John, I think
School districts are obligated to pay for transportation, like Kate said. If a student goes to a private school, they're obligated to pay transportation, nursing, textbooks, if they still use textbooks, but also special education. These are big ticket items, and they are absorbed into the budget, and it's something that school boards have, in addition to the fixed costs that you mentioned earlier. But as far as enrollment on the East End, taking a more global look at it as an assembly district, there are 25 school districts on the East End, and every single one of them, except 2, are graduating more students than they're taking in. I don't like to say they're losing students. We're not losing kids. We're graduating more than we're taking in. So, so our enrollment is down over 10 years. The 2 school districts that have one school district has gained children, and that's the Riverhead School District, and one is kind of keeping its same numbers, and that's Hampton Bays School District. But every other school district, the numbers are going down. What we are seeing is that school districts are supplying more of mental health services and special ed services and a lot of social services, just outright social services to the members of the community that we haven't, schools haven't done that in the past. And especially since COVID, they're doing it now. So the financial strain is real, even though that they have fewer students. And
the Assemblyman raises a great point. On Long Island, we saw over the last 10 years a drop in enrollment of just under 8%. Statewide, it was closer to 13, 14%, so we're a little bit less than what the state has seen over the last 10 years. However, increase in special ed students has shot up dramatically, particularly post-COVID. The shift to E&L students on Long Island has been a dramatic shift as well. So while we are serving less students, the needs of the students that we are serving are greater and come at a greater cost due to the mandates that are placed upon us. You know, with E&L students, there was a regulation that was put in place back when we first saw a wave of unaccompanied minors back in 2012, I'm going to say. And that was Part 154. That's a huge unfunded mandate from the State Education Department on how we educate E&L students. So as the population shift on Long Island saw the minority is now the majority, right? Those costs for those students have gone up dramatically. Special ed enrollments have increased dramatically, so those costs have gone up. The mental health crisis that we're dealing with is like something we have never seen ever. And it was developing and growing before COVID, and COVID just exacerbated it. The suicide rates, either attempts, ideations, or successful suicides have gone up dramatically. And schools have been investing heavily in resources to deal with this mental health crisis. It's not mandated, but if a student is not mentally well, they're not learning. Just like if they're hungry or they're tired, they're not learning. The Hampton Bays School District, and credit to the Southampton Town Police Department, piloted a program last winter called Handle with Care. And the Assemblyman, when he was a town councilman, approved this program. And now it's Southampton town-wide. And what Handle with Care is, if law enforcement responds to a house and they notice that there's school-age children in that house and it's a traumatic experience, they send a notification to the district. No other information is sent. The district looks up the address. That's all they get. And if there are students in that school and the kid comes in and they forgot their homework, or maybe the student is acting out and never acts out before, instead of sending the kid down for discipline, it's Handle with Care. Hey, Bob, see me during lunch. Let's talk about why the homework was missing, what's going on, without divulging anything. And that's just one little piece to reduce traumatic experiences for students that Hampton Bays was a leader on it. Lars Clemenson and Chief Kiernan were great, and now it's Southampton town-wide. And the Suffolk County Sheriff is piloting a program. It was just announced the other day up in Huntington, a similar program. So we're hoping that Handle with Care eventually goes statewide, but schools are doing a lot more than just the academics. And you know, we're dealing with some unprecedented stuff, whether it's screen time, artificial intelligence, the mental health crisis, and at the same time, the state is transforming what it means to get a diploma in New York State. So it's such a transformative time in public education, and superintendents and boards of education are juggling a lot of balls in the air, and I think they're doing a fantastic job with it, but we have a lot of work to do.
Great. Since you have all now touched on the tremendous financial pressures, especially as the needs have increased, and also Katie raised the question of transportation costs, I want to mention one other big change that I think is coming down the pike, which is the first national voucher law, which was passed as part of the big, beautiful bill. Now, states, as I understand it, and I think the details are still being ironed out, but states will have some discretion as to whether or how to adopt the vouchers. And I think a lot of folks are expecting that there will be some pressure to adopt vouchers, even in New York State, because of the money attached, and especially for religious schools. So have you guys had a chance to think about what the impact of vouchers might be? I think in the best case scenario, some folks are thinking if those voucher dollars can be used for after school programs or for mental health programs or whatever, then maybe it's a positive thing. But it's not clear what the regulations are going to be. So what are school boards going to have to think about? What are you all thinking about along these lines?
As a New York State legislator, well, you know what, school vouchers, it's not a new idea, and I'm not surprised that they would be part of something that the current administration would put forward and Congress would put forward. In my view, vouchers take money from public schools and send it over to private schools. I really believe that we should be supporting our local public schools to give a fair and even education. I do believe that if we take monies away from the schools, it's just going to put more pressure on our local schools to survive. And it really, it's a tough question. I want to see, what it looks like if it comes to New York State. It is something that we have pushed back on in New York State. We have not adopted vouchers. We do have charter schools in some areas of New York State, but for me, I would not support vouchers in the form that I have seen them in other states.
And just to be clear, vouchers, again, they work differently in different states, but at their most extreme, they're a bucket of money that individual families get, and they can literally take that money, that public school money, and take it to a private school or a religious school.
Right. And
You take the case of Florida, where a voucher is worth $10,000 or $12,000, but the private school is worth, the tuition is $17,000. These are somewhat wealthy families. This is taking $12,000 out of the public school, putting it into the private school. They're very happy about it. I get it. But it really is somewhat of a supporting a certain segment of the society, and we really need to take a hard look at that. These are going to be tough questions, and so I want to take a look at it and really hone that position. But that's kind of my overall view on vouchers.
And the Nassau Suffolk School Board Association is opposed to vouchers. We're opposed to public money being spent on private education, period, end of story. The problem is that you're taking dollars that is not necessarily portable when the student leaves, meaning that $10,000, the school's not going to see a savings of $10,000 just because one student is now coming out of the second grade and going to a private institution. You still have the teacher, you still have the bus, you still have the classroom, you still have the infrastructure to support that classroom. Until you reduce an entire section or until you reduce an entire class, you're not going to really see the savings. And that is the same issue that we have with charter schools, and the Riverhead Charter School is really negatively impacted with the tuition dollars that it pays over to Riverhead Charter, because the $22,000 isn't necessarily transferable per student, right? So what is the amount that's transferable? And just, again, I'm a big guy with statistics. If charter schools weren't making money, how does the head of a charter school in New York City, one of the ones we hear about all the time, the CEO pulls in a salary of over $1 million and has a school district essentially the size of Middle Country, thereby making 3-4 times the amount? Where is that coming from, right? So we have to do a study, and this is going to be one of the advocacy points that I'm going to be working with the Assemblyman on this year. So this is new to you, Tommy, John. We didn't get a chance to talk before we started, so we'll talk more after. We need to do a study as to what is the savings if a student leaves a district. Is it, because there is some savings. Is it $5,000? Is it $7,000? Is it $10,000? Then what should the tuition payment be that goes to the charter school? Because you can't take the profit margin out of public schools to support charter schools. That's just wrong.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to, before long, turn this over to the audience for their questions. So I want to throw out 2 questions and ask each of you to pick one of them to answer, okay? I'm hoping that maybe two of you will pick one and the other will pick the other. And Bob, maybe this is the best question for you. In concrete terms, what are the steps someone who is interested in running for school board should take if they want to make that a reality? That's question number 2. And question number 1. And question number 2 is, what's the most satisfying, because we've heard a lot of the daunting stuff, the financial stuff and all the needs, et cetera. So what are the most satisfying experiences you've had as a school board member? Maybe pick 1 or 2. And what advice do you have for someone who wants to run?
So steps you should take if you want to run: go to school board meetings. Learn what's going on in your individual district, because your perception might not be totally accurate with the reality going on, because I hear it all the time. We have this perception because the media portrays certain things a certain way. I know folks will find this hard to believe, but sometimes the stories in Newsday aren't exactly accurate. Sometimes the Newsday editorial board gets it wrong. They actually misquoted me in a Newsday editorial, And I had to show them the Newsday editorial that they printed 6 months earlier to say, well, no, this is what I said, not this. So sometimes there's a big misconception as to what goes on in school districts across Long Island. So go to school board meetings, get educated about what the issues are, and again, make sure that you're running for the academic success of the kids. And my most memorable moment, I'm going to kind of combine the two questions, is I'll never forget our valedictorian one year was a young man, came from a family who was totally impoverished, was on social services, in and out of shelters, became valedictorian of our class, a full ride to MIT. You don't think public education and the power of public education changed that child's life trajectory and his family's trajectory after that? It absolutely did. So the most satisfying thing is seeing the promise and the potential of public education to fruition. And again, it's not a thankless job, it's a priceless job because you get to see all the successes. And we're like referees in a football game. If we're doing it right, nobody knows us and who we are. If you're doing it wrong, you're on ESPN highlight reel the next day, and that's not where you want to be. So I highly encourage anybody to run for the school board, whether you have an educational background. I didn't have an educational background. I just cared about my community, cared about kids, and I wanted to serve and leave it better than I found it. And if you're that passionate, just do it. You have nothing to lose, and you have a lot more to gain.
I'll touch on, I'm not sure which question is the satisfaction of the school board. So I just want to backtrack a little bit. You were talking about the vouchers and money. And for those of you who don't know, Shinnecock students receive from the state of New York per student anywhere between, say, $20,000, $30,000 per student, upwards of $100,000 per student. So from the state of New York. So whatever district I sit on the school board at Southampton, obviously, so Southampton School Board from the state of New York receives between $4 and $6 million a year to educate Shinnecock, about 90 Shinnecock students. So that is a much larger number than per student, a taxpayer household, let's say, that may have 4 students, but they're paying 1 tax rate. If you have 4 Shinnecock students in a house, each one of those students receives funding to get educated by the school district. So over a 5-year period, a school district may receive $20 million in funding for that student. So just want to fast forward now to your question. I got on that school board when I saw the disparity in our education, and we pushed My Brother's Keeper, and there's big misconceptions about that. Well, now it's reverse discrimination because you're only targeting, you're only including Shinnecock kids. And the whole reason for My Brother's Keeper was to elevate students that were at a disadvantage to the rest of the demographics. So being on the school board not only elevates the Shinnecock kids, but if we bring in programming that helps the Shinnecock kids, or in policy as a school board member, it helps the entire district. And so for me, one of our students that we worked with in My Brother's Keeper, Tuesday night, I was in New York City. I missed my school board meeting Tuesday night for a very good reason. A gentleman who started the My Brother's Keeper Foundation with President Obama in 2014 recognized myself and my cousin Sean Smith, and he knows the work that we're doing with My Brother's Keeper. And he invited us to his house in New York City, his apartment in New York City, and to bring one of our My Brother's Keeper students that is now a political science major at Cortland, I believe. Sean, don't hate me if I got that wrong, because Sean went there also. But we got invited to his house, and we walk into the house, and there's about 12 people. This was just this past Tuesday, and one of the guests was Governor Hochul. So for this student, for Sean Smith and myself to be involved with this student and to have him experience something like that, sitting at the table with the governor, to ask her direct questions, and partly because I am on the school board and we've been pushing My Brother's Keeper to elevate students, that has been one of the most rewarding things to me of being on the school board, is the direct result of being on this board and pushing programs like that.
Thank you.
The eastern end of Long Island, our schools out here on the eastern end of Long Island are some of the best schools in the world. I mean, let's face it, it's kids who get A's in our schools, they're going to go to the college of their choice or go to the job. They're going to get a quality, world-class education. That is there for them, and the community provides that to them. So I am immensely proud of our schools, and they really are the centers of our communities. There's about 130 people who serve on school boards on the East End, and they should be commended. This talk is called the Training Wheels of Democracy. I truly think that it's the other way around. I think that our school board members are doing probably one of the most important jobs in our society, and that is overseeing the education of our children. So I commend them, and also for people who support public schools. So those are just some of my closing thoughts on that. I don't think they've really addressed the question, but I wanted to say that anyway.
Kate, you want to add to
Sure.
add to your science comments earlier, or just something else?
I will very briefly answer both questions and first reiterate the opening statement with, yes, show up to the meetings. That is the first step you can take if you're interested or intrigued by running for school board. Show up to the meetings, be an engaged community member, and while yes, first and foremost, you should do it for the children, you are investing in the future of your community by ensuring a strong education for these children. You might be surprised that you could contribute other things. And then for the most enriching moment, I would say it was actually the formation of the soccer team. And this is a testament to the beauty of a small community. There was a student who was interested in, it was right after the most recent Men's World Cup, and the school community was really coming together thanks to the teachers. They were putting the games on and having discussions about it, and so it was really, there was almost a fever in the schools. It was very exciting. And so one of the students wanted to start a soccer team, and one of the teachers knew that I loved soccer. I used to play, and so sent him to me, and they tracked me down, and I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to show up to the meetings, but I said, come prepared with certain information. I said, you can't just magically make a team appear. It has to be budgeted for, but so you have to make a strong argument. Show up with numbers. How many students are asking for a soccer team? How many students are not currently playing or playing a fall sport? Because that's really what it is. We only have so many sports as a small school. Is adding another fall sport, a different fall sport, going to increase enrollment in the athletic program? And those were like the top questions. And I then sent him on a mission to find some general budget items, what it would cost, and he did. And he rallied his future teammates to come to those meetings with that information. It took multiple meetings, and they got the soccer team. And what a way to talk about engaging with a more diverse student body. Soccer is an international sport, right? And you don't need a lot of equipment. That's the beauty of it, right? And so I will add that today was actually only the second home game on the island, and I had to miss it. I am a full force on the sidelines. I am so proud of those kids to have formed that team. And it's funny, one of the games last year, I was on the sidelines, and a mom from a visiting team looked at me as I was just not containing myself. She's like, oh, which one's yours? And I looked at her and I said, all of them. None of them. My son is 10. But really all of them. And that seeing them go through that process, if that's not an example of a successful education being applied to their lives, I don't know what is.
Can I add one
Thank you.
last thing?
Sure, sure.
The average tenure of a school board member is 5 years. The average tenure of a superintendent is also 5 years. It's proven that the longer tenured governance teams, meaning superintendents and board members, contribute dramatically to the academic success of the school district. So you want another selling point as to why to serve and continue to serve. The longer a governance team is together, serving together, the better the performance of the school district. That's a proven fact. So we need to do better than 5 years.
Great. Tommy John,
I did. I'd just like to say, in my last year or second to last year as a teacher, I was in class and about 8 or 11 kids all laughed at the same time. I'm pretty sure it was at me. I kept doing what I was doing, and I was thinking, oh God, they're organized, and this was new. So I can tell you that one of my proudest moments in the assembly this year was voting yes to ban cell phones in school, in the state of New York. So.
hallelujah. Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And No, I'd like to open it up for questions. Kathy, do you mind taking my mic around?
He has one in the back.
No, we have a remote.
Is it on? As a member of the League of Women Voters, I've moderated several school board debates for Southampton, and the audiences have been so small. And you, Kate, also said that not getting people to attend school board meetings is difficult. And I believe that the vote for school boards is also,
Way down.
quite small. So I'm wondering what your ideas are to increase those numbers.
This is something we've been struggling with as far as we have a huge concern about the voter apathy that we see at school board budgets and trustee elections. Since the inception of the tax cap, what we have seen statewide and certainly here on Long Island is that voter turnout has gone down dramatically for districts that stay within the cap. So if you stay within the cap, the turnout's not there. However, you're seeing a larger percentage of yes votes compared to no votes. So what that tells us is if a school district stays within the cap, the no voters are staying home and they're not voting. And the yes voters are still coming out because they support the schools. The problem with that, though, is you can have an outside group take over a school board with very few votes to swing it the other way, and then you could have chaos within your governance team. You could have a budget go down with a very small differential because the turnout is very low. So we're really concerned about the voter apathy that we have seen since the inception of the tax cap. I had a board vice president. She was on the board, God bless her, for 40 years. And she used to say, if you want people to turn out to meetings or turn out to a budget vote, we're just going to cut music this year. People will come out, right? Or cut the football team. But I think, I don't like to rest on our laurels and say there's a great level of satisfaction with the higher percentage of yes votes compared to no votes while less people are being engaged. I hope that, again, engaging student members as ex officios at the table engages a new generation as to why it matters to vote in school budgets and school trustee elections. And again, it's the most grassroots form of democracy that you have. You have great access to your school board trustees, right? I always tell newly elected school board members, if you go into the supermarket, never buy a gallon of ice cream anymore, because by the time you leave, it's going to be soup, because somebody's, hey, my kid doesn't get enough playing time, about this teacher, that, you're constantly a school board member. So we do need to get better turnout at the polls every May. I know there's some talk about combining school board elections and budget elections with the general election. There's some problems with that we would push back against. We'll wait online for hours for the new iPhone, but we won't take 5 minutes to vote. So we're trying to develop some sort of marketing strategies to communicate to the public why it matters to vote. A voting community gets the attention of those that are in charge. So that's another reason. So it is a problem, and it's something that we're seeing statewide, not just here on the island. Other parts of New York State, they're having problems finding people to run for school board seats. Again, we haven't seen that here on the island so much, but it is a problem in rural upstate New York. And I am grateful that the political polarization that has impacted some school board elections around the country and other parts of the state, we haven't seen that here on the island, but we don't take it for granted. And we're not taking political sides. We just don't think some of the polarization and the cultural topics belong at the governance table of a school board. Some may disagree with that depending on issues and decisions that are made, but we hope that you choose to serve because you care about kids and you care about kids succeeding and being able to succeed when they get their diploma, and you just want to serve your community and give back. So again, it's a great experience. You learn a lot, and you have a front row seat, and you play a role in your community's success. If you have successful schools, it impacts your real estate values. That's a given, right? People ask the price of the house and what school district it is. So again, you could play a role to help even transform your community, even if you don't have kids in the school too.
My name is Noah Kent, and I'm serving as a student board member for Hampton High School. And we ran last April, last May. And to answer your question, to increase the attendance, I came up with a plan to advertise the meetings in school to the kids and to the parents. And I'm very passionate about that. When I get older, one of the things I want to accomplish in life is tweaking the school system, because not everybody learns one way. And I'm very passionate about that. I'm very passionate about statistics and studies and everything. And I came here tonight after a golf match, so I'm a man of very many events each night. And I have drive, I have passion, and I'm trying to slowly change things and speak up for students, because they're the ones that are at school every day, learning and taking in information and bringing it home and applying it to life. So that's why I just wanted to say that. So I'm going to try to encourage the attendance rate to go up, and also since we're in 2025, there's online videoing, and people watch the meetings every night, so or every time the meeting happens. So we are in a digital world, and that's what people do now, unfortunately. But we get what we get, and can't get upset. So yeah.
Congratulations and thank you for your service.
Yep.
And here's a little interesting fact: the New York State Comptroller ran for school board when he was 18 and began his political career that way, and now he holds a statewide office. So just a little thought there.
No, good. And having been a member in this community with 2 kids in the district and having attended a number of school board meetings, one of the questions that I don't hear being asked that I think is a poignant question is, why aren't more parents attending? That is the poignant question. Why not? And I don't want to put it on a dollar sign, because I think that's an easy out. There are deeper layers of what's going on, and in particular in our community here on the East End. We are a multi-layered community, whether it is Shelter Island or Southampton or East Hampton, and each district is its own personality. Even in Southampton, we have an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school, and they are all their own private islands. They are not functioning integrated, and they need to be. And as a parent who has attended over years, and my older daughter, this is now also a counterpart to Noah, who graduated 5 years ago and participated as much as she could speak. There wasn't an opportunity to be a member of the board as a student, but spoke at board meetings. There was an experience of not being taken seriously, not being heard. And regardless of race, SES, cultural background, it is an experience that our community in Southampton, I will speak to, collectively is having on a daily basis. And I think that is the bigger question, as to how does that get addressed in order to draw community members, parents, along with the students, to actually show up, so that what you're giving up. I work all day long. I have to give up a night with my kids. They're older now in order to go there. And I did that. But it felt fruitless, futile, totally.
Thank you for that. Actually, could maybe Charmaine and maybe address how welcoming of the school? They be more welcoming?
I honestly can only speak to my own experience, right? And I think that, yeah, the board has to set the culture, I guess. And for Shelter Island, there were some issues. A big one that's coming to mind is the mascot change, the Shelter Island Indian mascot. That was actually driven by the students. We had 3 full days of public meetings, back to back, to hear everybody's views before a decision was made. So was that awesome? Also as a working parent? No. But it was incredibly valuable to, I'm absolutely grateful and proud that we gave the entire community the opportunity to feel heard. I can't speak to another school board, I don't know. Anyone else?
They each do have their own personalities, and it depends on, the members and how the boards have been running. And I would urge you to get on the Audit Advisory Committee or the Buildings Committee, right? Because we're always looking for volunteers to work on these committees to, give suggestions to the school board. Just, you probably are. But I know that, the school boards and I've been to a number of different school board meetings, and they all seem to have a different configuration of the table, how they, some members even turned. It's just, sometimes it's how the room is, sometimes they're up on a stage. So, these things are all factors, and I think the boards need to take those things into consideration to enfranchise the community.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I worked for a large school district in Nassau County for over 20 years as the public information community relations person. And we always had lots of people at our school board meetings because the school boards had presentations. In other words, there were curriculum presentations at the school board meetings. They honored students at the school board meetings. All of these programs brought in parents, and we always had a good turnout. In fact, we had to move from a room into, a large cafeteria at one of the high schools. So that might be something that school boards could consider. So when you have AP scholars, you can honor them at the school board meeting. When you have a new program that you're just developing, you can have that presentation made at the school board meeting, and maybe the press will come and write about it.
Yeah. And a lot of school boards do that. They have student presentations, student recognition, staff recognition to try to draw out the crowd. The business portion of the school board meeting is really, really boring, right? When you're going through all the resolutions and taking care of the business of the district with personnel decisions, contracts, and everything else. But as a resident, that's the most important part of the meeting because you're seeing what's being adopted, what's being considered, what's being proposed, and everything's a cycle. So what I found in my 18 years experience, and just like this lady iterated, we did the same thing. We'd have a student performance in the beginning, then we'd have a building report and a lot of parent engagement. And once those presentations part of the meeting was done, everybody got up, they went out, and then we were into the business portion of the meeting, which was all the different resolutions that had to be adopted to take care of the business of the district. I don't know how you make that process more engaging, but as far as public comment period, it's a very tricky dance sometimes as far as what's being talked about and the interaction between the board and the public, because I used to say to folks all the time, it's a meeting in public, it's not necessarily a public meeting, but the school board associations, both the state association and we stress, best practices for engagement during a meeting. And there are certain things we can comment on, certain things we cannot comment on. But we try to engage the public in meaningful ways so that folks do know what's going on. And to the young man's point, you know, everything's being streamed now, so you could watch it at your leisure. But those strategies are in place in a lot of districts across our region, and I suspect around the state as well.
We're going to take 2 more questions, one over here, and then the last one.
And Bob, I don't mean to insult you at all because with your statistics or your service.
I have a very thick skin.
But
It's okay.
wouldn't term limits help the school board, the election, and more excitement? I find that both school boards, but also in our local elections out here, we have so many people run uncontested year after year after year. One of the things that really does jazz up an election and gets people out is when somebody comes in and challenges the status quo. And I think that with maybe it's a 10-year limit, you know, I get your point that the longer they're in, the better, but also I think it can get old and stale. So just a question.
So
we do have
my
term
personal
limits.
opinion, I think there's pros and cons to term limits of any elective office, right? But there is something to be said, and I'll go back to my board vice president who was there for 40 years. She was great with the institutional history on how a decision or a process or a policy developed and how you got there. And as a newbie, when I was a newbie, I might not have had the appreciation for how a certain policy was in place without understanding the context and the history of it. So I think there is something to institutional stability. The other thing I would say against term limits, if you want to attract the best superintendent of schools, because the most important thing that a school board does is select, supervise the superintendent of schools. That's the only person they supervise. The superintendent of schools does the rest. If you want to attract the best leader to lead your district, the good superintendents are going to schools that have stability amongst their governance teams. And that's probably a contributing factor to the studies that show greater stability leads to greater success both academically and everywhere else, right? It's not just about, you know, I say it's about the 3 E's. If we give a kid a diploma, they better be ready for the 3 E's or a combination of. And that's enroll in higher education, not having to take remedial courses, ready to be employed either as an entrepreneur in the trades, in manufacturing or whatever it is, or, you know, open up your own restaurant, or be eligible to enlist in the military. 70% of our high school kids are not eligible to enlist. 70% are not eligible to enlist in today's military for a variety of reasons. If a school system has prepared our kids for one of those 3 E's or a combination, then we've been successful. And again, I think stability amongst the governance team, including a superintendent of schools and their board, the data proves greater success. But I would always say to folks, I am term limited every 3 years. I'm up and I'm running alongside my budget. And I was with the oddity. I used to get aggravated if I was uncontested because I wanted the affirmation that the public still wanted me and I just wasn't the last person standing. The last year I ran, my son mounted a write-in campaign against me. True story. At the end of the night, I beat him handedly, and I said elections have consequences, and I made him clean the basement. So, I'm not in favor of term limits for the reason for stability of the governance team and what it's proven to play out.
My 14th year on the vice president. So
So we're going to give you
most
free
of us-
therapy at the end of this session.
most of our board members have started out as parents or grandparents or former educators, okay? But I have not had a student in the school district in 6 years, and I'm still there. Because it's more about the commitment to the community and the students overall and the student body. And to your point about how long you're there and you know, I've always said if I stop having ideas or lose that spark, then I am happy to turn it over to someone else. It's hard to find someone else because not many people are banging down the door to do this. But you can really impact lives, and like vocational education was my thing. So in my tenure, we were able to put in an automotive program when we redid our bus barn. So we just graduated our first class of automotive students who are working in a state-of-the-art facility alongside our bus drivers and our transportation depot. We put in a full culinary kitchen. So we have our prep, the traditional, like, quote-unquote home ec classes. But then we have a full CTE program in culinary arts. We are working on a medical assistant program. So as long as you have a school board and a team of administrators that are willing to think outside the box and act, then I don't believe the amount of time that you are there really plays any role. I think in terms of the apathy that we do see, part of it too, we are now televised. So years ago, we did have more people that did come in person to the meetings, but our meetings now actually are televised on LTV. And I do know a lot of people will tell me that they watched it and have questions. But we do see less people coming into our meetings. However, what we did to try to combat that was almost every single meeting, we have a student group that comes in. Sometimes we have 2 or 3 different presentations. Maybe one of the building administrators is doing a presentation, and then we also have a student group doing a presentation. So that brings people also in. We put in an email address that goes to all of the board members, and in our community at least, we're all involved in a lot of things, so we're fairly accessible to our community, which is helpful. You have to learn to do Peapod because it's true, if there is some sort of big drama going on, that's not the day that you want. We have kind of an inside joke, like don't go to Stop and Shop. But you do have to have a little bit of a thick skin. But it is fulfilling. And so we're trying to encourage people, and we actually are doing something unusual. We did this with our administration. We did a succession plan when we were knowing that our superintendent, who had been there for a while, was getting ready to retire. And so the entire school board worked with all of our administrators to bring people up and to train them and and we're actually starting to do that with the school board now, because at 14 years and 13 years, we're trying to get newer people to come in and come on, because we have a bunch of us with institutional knowledge, which is very important, but we also need the younger people, the parents that have kids in the school district now that know what's going on. So like for the first time ever, we have a co-vice president alongside me, so that we can start bringing, the next people up as the institutional knowledge gets ready to leave the door.
That's a great governance team right there. Well done, and I loved everything you said. Thank you for your service.
I lost my mic, but thank you all for participating. Thank you so much, and thank you for coming. And for our remote audience watching from their living rooms and kitchens, we hope you learned a lot. Thanks.